contigo en la distancia estoy.
Welcome. This room that is part of the Regional Museum of Guadalajara, we can even say that is the most important room in the museum. It's called First Inhabitants. This name was applied as the result of the big remodeling process. Before this, it was called the Room of Paleontology. As we come in, we are going to see the oldest fossil that we have in this museum. It is the skull of a rhino, which has approximately between 5 and 9 million years old. The rhino of Juchitlan didn't have a horn as the actual rhinos that we all know today, and it also didn't have the same size. It was very similar to a hippopotamus, very short and short legs. Next, we are going to see a small map of the Earth so we can get into context. It is called the First Inhabitants because one of the most important topics of the room is migration. How does the human being arrive to America? It arrives through the Bering Strait. The human being has its origin in Africa, and for different circumstances, be it the climate, home, food, starts to emigrate from Africa to Europe and then to Asia, and then to the Bering Sea, which today divides what is Asia from America, being more specific, Alaska. In the glacial period with the Pleistocene, all this ocean was frozen. It was then a natural bridge that man used to get across from Asia to America and began to populate our continent. Here we have a recreation according to the bones that have been found of the skin man and the woman from Maroon in Quintana Roo. According to these remains, it can be determined that this was the appearance of the first inhabitants in our continent. It is said that they arrived 13,500 to 14,000 from our era. Now we are going to see what was the impact of the appearance of men with megafauna, which is another important element that we are going to see, the megafauna of the Pleistocene. Mega means huge, big, etc., and fauna means a group of organisms that make up an ecosystem. What we are looking here, the megafauna that used to live in our country, more specific in the center of the country. What today is Jalisco, Colima, Nayarit. Of course, these weren't all the animals that lived here, but they were the ones with the most population in this part of the country. And there are 4 animals in this picture that we can say that still exists in our days. One of them is the Primeros antelope. Tetra means 4. It is called that name because he has 4 antlers. The camels, the capybara, and the wolf. We can say that these animals are still among us. The only thing that changes is their size. They are not that big anymore. To have a better idea, the camels used to be 4 meters tall. And if we get into context again, this room is 5 meters tall. That gives us even a better idea of the size of these animals. Therefore, the name, Megafauna. In a quick way, we'll see another animals. This is a Mammoth of Colombia, a type of horse. We already saw Primeros, a camel, and a Mylodont, which is a kind of sloth. This is the biggest animal of the Pleistocene. Mammoths were the biggest in general proportions. Megatherium, or Pan American sloth, here in our country was an animal of 6 meters tall. It could weigh 6 tons, and it was a very close relative of the Mylodont. Both were giant sloths. Only the Mylodont could reach 4 meters tall and weigh 2 or 3 tons, and it was a herbivore, and Megatherium, or Pan American sloth, was an omnivore. That means that the Pan American sloth could eat everything. They could eat meat, vegetables, fruits, insects, etc. One of his favorite preys, when he couldn't find the type of herbs he liked, was the Glyptodont. Some people say it's related to the armadillo, but it is only in appearance. His height was 1 meter tall, and its shell had these small circles that some paleontologists call rosettes. It had a circumference of 3.5 meters. Practically, we can say that it had the size of a small car. This was one of his favorite preys. Okay, we've seen already the wolf. Saber-toothed tiger or Smilodont that we have in our territory. We used to have different species. One was like an actual tiger but a little more robust, didn't have a long tail, and had longer legs. The short-faced bear was the largest and powerful carnivore, of which there is a record. The short-faced bear, in spite of his appearance of a black bear or a brown bear, it was 4 meters tall and had very long legs. It could weigh 1,200 kilograms. Without any trouble, it could reach the ceiling of this room, which is 5 meters tall. And also, we can say that this is the animal who prevented the human being from reaching our continent earlier. When human beings tried to cross Bering Strait to Alaska, they bumped into these animals. They were very complicated animals to escape from. Then we have the Confoterio, which is a very close relative of the mammoths. So, in general terms, this is the megafauna of the Pleistocene. Some differences between mammoths and Confoterios are the tusks. Confoterios' tusks were straight and mammoths were curved, and also didn't have a hump. Scientists have catalogued 10 different species of mammoths. The one we have in our museum is the third largest mammoth that existed. It is called Mammoth of Colombia, which is almost identical in appearance of an Asian elephant. Small ears, long skull, and bigger size. Now we are going to see how it looked like. Now we are looking at the skeleton of the Mammoth of St. Catherine, which is a small town very close to Chapala's Lake. It was found in February 11th, 1962. It was found while digging a hole. Some workers found something they thought it was a rock or a big stone, but at the same time they realized it was a bone of a very big animal that they didn't know about. When they sent for a specialist, arrived to the scene a guy called Luis Larios Ocampo. He wasn't a paleontologist or an archaeologist, but a sculptor. He gets to this small ranch called El Tule. When he continued the digging, he realizes that that huge bone belonged to a mammoth. After a year of excavations, they had to bring the skeleton to the museum to catalog and classify them so they could put them back together. Let's remember that it was found in February 11th, 1962. Now let's talk a little bit of him. Lots of people think this mammoth was a female because of the butterfly of its hip, which is very wide, but what really determined it was a male were his tusks. Male tusks are broad and curved, and female tusks are almost straight and thinner. Here in the museum, people ask why there are 4 tusks. The original tusks are the ones that lay on the floor. Why? Because we're talking about a fossil and that is petrified. This happens when there's a trade between organic material and mineral material during thousands and thousands of years, when the bones absorb the calcium in the soil and changes into a stone. We can say that it's a stone in the shape of a bone, and their weight is between 70 to 80 kilograms each. That is why it was determined that the tusks couldn't be placed onto the skeleton, because their weight could collapse the entire thing. The other ones are a replica made out of glass fiber. They are commonly named tusks, but the most accurate theory is that the real name is defenses. Why are they called tusks? Only by mere tradition. Mammoths had only molars. It had 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. Each molar could weigh between 1.5 to 3 kilograms, and as you can see, they are almost smooth. This tells us that he could only eat herbs and tree leaves, only soft things. Unlike Confoterio, these are some molars of a Confoterio. As we can see, they are very different. They are very similar to the molars of a carnivore or a human being. This tells us that this animal could chew tree branches and tree bark. The mammoth couldn't. That's one of many differences that sometimes we cannot see. But let's keep talking about the mammoth. Males of these types of mammoths could reach between 3 up to 5 meters tall and 5 meters long without defenses. And it was the type of mammoth that had the longest defenses out of the 10 different species of mammoths that existed, reaching up to 4.90 meters long, and this gives us a grand total of 5 meters tall and almost 10 meters long. It could weigh up to 12 tons, the biggest males. Then we're talking about an animal twice the size of the biggest elephant in actual days. But practically their habits, biology, morphology were the same. They used to eat up to 200 kilograms of food each day and up to 200 liters every day. They used to live in herds of 25 individuals, and it was a patriarchal society. But when the alpha male wasn't around, the female took charge. She decided where to eat, where to rest, etc. Mammoths could live up to 70 years old. Only the newborn males or young could be in the herd. When they reached adulthood, they had to leave the herd. What for? For protection of other predators or to make new herds. And when they could reincorporate to their old herd, practically in mating periods. Once the female got pregnant, her pregnancy lasted up to 22 months, almost 2 years, and she could only have one calf. Why? Because of the size. If it was a female, her weight could be up to 98 kilograms, and if it was a male, almost 130 kilograms. Why were they so big? Because they could grow up 1 centimeter per day until they were 40 years old. Human beings grow up from 1 to 3 centimeters per year, but a lot of people can say that if that was so, mammoth would be bigger, but it was proportional. Not only did they become taller, but also wider. Not all the males were the same size, but in general terms, this was the mammoth. Why did all this megafauna got extinct? There are 3 hypotheses. 2 are going by hand. One is the climate change. There was a big temperature change. Poles began to melt, therefore there's a lot of water, and if there's a lot of water, there's too much grass for the herbivores. Therefore, there are lots of predators. Let's say that during this period of time everything was joy and happiness, because neither carnivores nor herbivores had to walk long distances to get their food. But the temperature kept rising, bringing along drought. Therefore, everything began to get scarce. But the only animals that weren't sad about this were the carnivores, because they just had to wait for the other animals to die so they could eat them. But temperatures kept rising, now affecting all species and all this megafauna. But when everything was about to collapse, human beings appeared, bringing along their own needs, like food, clothing, continuing in that lithic period where his primary material to make his tools was stone. They began to study other materials, such as bones. They began hunting mammoths and glyptodonts, practically until they were extinct. Why? Because mammoths represented food. If they were lucky enough to hunt a mammoth, it was food for a lot of days. And they had their main material to make their weapons and tools. And also they had a lot of skin. Even though it wasn't a woolly mammoth, the skin was very important. The skin was used to make their own clothes. So, by exterminating a species like mammoths represents a breakdown, because mammoths were the ones who kept carnivores in line. As you can see, in actual days, where there are lots of elephants, are lots of other animals, because they represent protection against other predators. Saber-toothed tiger wasn't going to attack any animal who was near to a herd of mammoths. And when mammoths disappeared, that balance was broken, bringing that megafauna to a collapse. The only animals that resisted these climate changes and human beings were the ones we said at the beginning: wolves, camels, and capybara. Later on, we're going to talk about horses and camels. Capybara is the biggest rodent of the world. It could weigh up to 70 kilograms. In these days, we can only find them in the southern part of our country, most of all in Chiapas, where there is a lot of water, where it spends 95% of its life. Here, now we're going to talk about camels and horses. They have their origins in North America. Camels and other animals of the same family emigrating during this glacial period to the south and to Eurasia, along with the horse, and there they settle down. They get across through the Bering Strait, and once the warming stops, they can't get back, and they had to stay there. But horses did come back. During the conquest period, the Europeans brought him back, but really the camels and the horses have their origins in North America. But most of all, camels and llamas, who are very notable in South America. In biology, there's something called homeostasis. This is when our bodies begin to stabilize to the weather changes and different temperatures. Us as humans can notice it, but for the animals, crossing the line of Ecuador causes them a huge conflict. Not all species can resist it. That's why camels, but most of all, llamas, stay to populate South America. And finally, there's something that I forgot to explain. We already said that mammoths had only molars. As you can see in his jaw, there are no teeth. Some scientists believe that the tusks or defenses are some kind of evolution in his jaw. But in reality, mammoths didn't have incisor canines. That's why the real name is defense, just like in elephants. It is said elephant defenses is the most accepted theory and the most accurate term. And last but not least, if we place ourselves in front of the mammoth, we'll realize that one of the defenses is always longer than the other. This means that just like human beings, they are left and right-handed. As we can see, the left defense is longer, most probably because this mammoth was left-handed. That's something that most people don't know, but also in the animal kingdom are left and right-handed creatures. Thank you.
Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia.
Secretaría de Cultura.
Gobierno de México.